how do logic gates work? Ever since logic gates got released to the public servers, all of a sudden everyone's trying to use these logic gates to make computers or some weird thing. Whoa, what was that? Is that what I think it is? Is that a Moby Dick? When they try to make computers, they have no idea where to start or who to watch. Well, other than me, but they kind of skim my videos and skip through a lot of parts. So with that, I'm going to make another video that goes more in depth so that you guys can't skip anything at all or miss anything. Anyways, let's go and start. Before I even start, I'm going to say watch and then do, because if you just watch this like it's a tutorial and then copy on the side, you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff. It's best to understand than just copy. Let's start off with the OR gate. Let's say we have a pipe full of water. The passage is constructed by two walls, the red wall and the blue wall. Well, what would happen if I get rid of the blue wall? Then the water would flow through. Well, what about the red? Same thing happens. This is because the OR gate takes in either or inputs. I'm gonna be honest, I'm only talking like a first grade teacher because I'm pretty sure you guys were taught this in first grade. So what about the AND gate? If I were to remove the red wall, then it does not pass through. Same goes with the blue. It would only pass through if I were to delete both of those walls. Why does this happen? Well, it is because the AND gate requires all inputs to be on. Well, what about the exclusive OR gate? I'll explain it like this. Let's say you're a child trying to get down the hall in the middle of the night. So you turn on the lights and walk down the hall. And now you want to turn off the lights, so you flick the switch, but it does nothing. Due to the lights staying on, the child's going to get beaten by his own parents for wasting electricity. We can save the kid by using an exclusive OR gate. The exclusive OR gate only allows an odd amount of inputs to be on, not an even amount of inputs. Let's go and use this for our lights. Yeah. Now when the kid crosses through, he can finally turn off the light by enabling both switches, allowing him to be saved from getting beaten by his own parents. So what is this not function right here? Basically, we can think of it as an inverter. For example, this NOR gate. It's the opposite of a OR gate. When an input is on, then it would turn off instead of turning on. Same goes with this NAND gate. Would require all inputs to be on for the NAND gate to turn off. And for the exclusive OR gate, it would require a even amount of inputs to be on for the output to turn on. And if the inputs are odd, then it would turn off. So for the mechanical builders that are wondering, how is this useful? Specifically the ones that aren't into computing and are more into just mechanical stuff. You can use it for mechs in a whole lot of builds. You Trollmaker players knows what's up. For example, keyframing for this archer mech. I use logic gates and delays to animate this mech using keyframes. And this thruster hovering mechanic uses pulse width modulation to make it hover in the air, heavily relying on the oscillation clock, and uses AND gates to determine the amount of power it should use. Hey CatsRW, how do I make a keyframe and how do I make something that loops? Well, let's go and start off with looping. Well, looping for mech builders. When you loop these two together, it would be considered a logical error. In real life, it'd be a short circuit and blow up. But if you plug in two NORs together, they would become something called an SR latch, which is going to be explained in another video for memory. This video is just for mechanical builders, so what if you plug in the NOR into a delay and then back into itself? Well, what we have just created is a cycle generator. What I call it is a oscillator. This can be used for a wide variety of mechanical builds. My favorite being a mech. Plug that NAND into the delay and plug the delay into the NAND. Now let's go and invert the signal so it's off until activated, and then plug in the OR gate into the AND so that it only activates when you press a button. And then let's also add in a delay to determine when it should start. I'll set this to 0. I'll stack up two servos, one inverted and one not. The bottom looping mechanism will be for the bottom servo, and the top looping mechanism will be for the top servo. I want the oscillation time to be at 0.5. I'll add only to the bottom start time 0.5, which is 0.55. Activating this will give us a nice swaying motion. You guys know where I'm going with this, right? This brings us to mech legs using the oscillators. So perfect, am I right? Now let's do another example that we usually just use mechanics for, but we can also use logic gates for. The gearbox. Let's say we have an array of wheels set up, all with different speeds, and one that goes in reverse. How do we make it swap between speeds? Well, for starters, we can make a binary decoder. Let's start off with just 2 bits. This input goes into the NOT gate. These are both going to be used for deciding which input is going to be activated. Basically, when I input 1 in binary, it would swap over to another AND gate. All I have to do is just make the other AND gates that connect to the other inputs. And since 2 to the power of 2 is 4, we're going to make 4 AND gates. Basically for wiring, let's just select whichever is on with whatever binary number we have on and plug it in. Now when we test it, ignore those AND gates up there, that's just for organization for future use. If I were to select a certain number, it would change speeds varying on the gear number that I select. Now let's say we want to have 8 modes, 6 for speed, 1 for reverse, and 1 for neutral. We can do this by having 8 outputs for the decoder. Let's clear the wiring and add more bits. Since a cube root of 8 is 3, we're going to add in 8 outputs and 3 inputs. To help you with wiring, you could always just input whatever binary number and then wire whatever gets selected. Now let's also go and change our wheels to 7. 7 because I want no speed for when it's neutral. Now when we swap between our binary number inputs, we get our first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, and sixth gear, and our reverse. Now how do we swap between these inputs? Well, for one, we're going to have to use memory and a basic adder. Once again, if you don't know what these are, you can watch my other computing videos, but this is for the ECU, something that has to do with computing. So we can start off by making our 3-bit memory and then making our 3-bit adder and subtractor. Since I know some of you guys are just completely new here, let me go and explain some basic logic. This is an SR latch, a save reset latch. When the top one is pressed, it would save. When the bottom one is pressed, then it would reset. Hey CatsRW, I only wanted to save a certain value when I press save. Well, we can do that using AND gates. Top one is going to have a NOT gate plugged into it. I'll explain why later. I'll also use the OR gates as some way to have inputs so that it's easier to organize later on. Now, the bottom one is going to be plugged into both AND gates, and the top one is going to be plugged into the first NOT gate before the AND and plugged into the bottom AND gate. This is what we call a data latch. The top input is our value input, and the bottom input is our save. When we press the top input, of course nothing will happen. That's until we ask it to save whatever value's on top. Now when we turn off our save, it will stay as inputted until we have a 0 as a value, and then save it again. Now when it comes to very high processing speeds, over 50 Hz, this would start to bug out, and this is why we resort to using something called the rising edge. The rising edge is the exact moment a digital signal transitions from a low signal to a high signal. Why we want this to be used inside memory is because why we use the rising edge is so we can create a precise synchronized moment to capture whatever data gets transmitted. Now the average person would say, well, we could just use a NOT gate, a NAND gate, and a OR gate, and it should just only collect the rising edge, right? This would collect both the rising edge and the falling edge, which is what we do not want. Now, so we're going to resort to something a little bit harder. Now stay with me. This right here is my input gate. I'm just going to color that white so we can keep track. I'm going to plug in the input to the AND gate right here. This is going to go into the OR gate up here, and then it's going to go back into itself. So OR gate is going to get plugged into the NOT gate right there. And this input gate is going to get plugged into the AND gate at the far right. The NOT gate will get plugged into the AND gate, then the AND gate will go back into the OR gate right there. I'm sorry if that was hard, you might have to slow it down a bit or rewatch, but plugging this into our data latch, we have made something that only collects the rising edge of the save value. Now, as you can see, even though the save is on, it won't collect a value unless the save detects a rising edge. Now we can start on the ALU of the ECU gearbox. Before I explain this, there will be 2 outputs of the adder. There will be a sum and a carry. Now why do you think this is so? Let me pull out the Microsoft whiteboard for this. Let's say we're adding 2 values, 1010 and 0110. Below the line will be our sum. In this case, 0 plus 0 is obviously 0. Now in computing, we only have a high and low, which would be a 1 and 0. Now adding this, 1 plus 1 would turn into a 0, and we have to carry over the bit to the left. So how do we even read this? Well, in binary, it goes by the power of 2. So times 1 times 2 times 4 times 8 times 16 and times 32. So how would we read this? Well, we know there's no 1, we know there's no 2, we know there's no 4, we know there's no 8, but there is a 16. So this would equal 16. Now with this knowledge, we know that the sum will only turn on if the input is odd or a 1, and the bottom will only turn on if 2 inputs are on. We can use the exclusive OR gate to detect if it's an odd number, and we can use the AND gate to detect if 2 inputs are at least on. Now if 2 inputs are 1, then it'll go over from the sum to the carry. But if all three are on, then it'll be on some and also the carry. So how can we utilize this? Well, let's first start off by making a 3-bit adder. Let's plug in our carry outputs into our carry inputs. The red on the left is our carry input, the red on the right is our carry output. Let's go and plug in our inputs. The first array of levers will be for the A values. The second array of levers will be for the B values. This gives us our 3-bit binary adder. Let's say 1 plus 1, that equals 2 in binary, and 5 plus 2, that should equal 8, which is all inputs on. Now why I made this is because we have to make something called the counter with the memory. Don't forget we also have to subtract. For this, we could just negate the bits. Instead of using NOT gates, we could always just use an exclusive OR gate. While plugging the B inputs back into B, let's also plug in our subtract toggle into the carry and also the other exclusive OR gates. To test this, we can say 3 minus 3 and that equals 0. And it works. The output is the dark green on the right, by the way. To shift +1 up a gear, shift down -1 down a gear. Let's go bring our memory over here and let's go and do some controlled looping. I'm going to have a button here for a clock. Our clock is going to be when we save or press a button like this. Let's have a bit constantly on 1 on the B input. I'm also going to mirror over the outputs to this side so it's easier to connect. Let's plug in our memory output into our adder input. Let's also have this feed back into itself. Now when I press a button, it starts counting upwards from 0 to 7. Now we can use this for a gearbox, but before we do that, we have to be able to control going downwards a gear. Plugging this straight into subtraction will do absolutely nothing, so it'll just bug the whole entire build. This is where keyframing comes in, being able to have something go on for a certain amount of time and then turn off after a certain amount of time. I'll add a delay that goes straight into the clock that tells the ECU when to save. Now when we shift up a gear, the numbers will start counting up. And when we shift down, we'll start counting downwards until we reach 0. Now let's plug this straight into our wheel decoder. Now there's one thing we're missing, which is the throttle. This is where our mechanical intuition comes in by making a physical clutch. Now to test this, we can shift into our first gear, clutch and then shift up into our second gear, clutch and then shift up into our third gear, clutch and shift up into our fourth gear, fifth, sixth, and then we can shift back down. And to finally test, let's go into a reverse gear. And it works as we want it to. Perfect. Now I hope you mechanical geniuses do something good with the information I just given you. I showed you how to keyframe, how to utilize loops for mechs, and how to make modes for gearboxes and a lot of other stuff. I hope you guys learned something. That is honestly all I have to say. Anyways, see y'all and bye.